After hearing that, it's easy to understand why we all hold on to negative emotions and feelings about ourselves in every area of our lives, from relationships to work or even our physical appearances. Most of us are walking around every day with our brains stuck in the past, reliving every crappy thing that was ever said to us or every destructive thought we've ever had, like the world's most depressing treadmill. Yeah, and you thought treadmills couldn't get even more depressing. Hello and welcome back to What's Your One Thing, the podcast where we celebrate the small acts we do each and every day, that put a little smile on your face and a pep in your step. It's these little things that can make a big difference in how we feel and show up to others, but really, it's just my excuse to get people to talk more about the positive things going on in their lives instead of the default negative. I'm your host, Jordan Hiller, and I am so pumped you are joining me for the second episode. And yes, there are still people out there that say pumped. It really does mean a lot. Last week, I introduced the idea of actively looking for your one thing that makes you happy, that makes you smile, or just overall makes you feel good inside. And as you would expect, when you launch a podcast out of nowhere and send it out to only a handful of people, you're not going to get a heck of a lot of feedback. Editor's note, maybe I need to work on self-promotion? Anyways, even with such a small sample size, there were two overarching themes in the responses. Number one, get a better mic. I knew going into this I didn't have the best setup, but I've been telling myself for years I was going to launch. I didn't want it to end up being another excuse. I hope you can tell that the quality is different for episode 2. Shout out to Timber Smith from Appleton Engage Podcast and his personal show, The Kosh, for loaning me a mic while I sample them out and see what works best. I really do appreciate it. The second overarching response was that most people found it hard to think of their one thing. Some even talked about how they focus too much on the negative aspects of their lives. If that sounds like you, hang out with me for a little bit longer and let's see if we can work together to try and change that mindset. Did you know there is a part of your brain called the reticular activating system? Basically, it's your brain's special filter for your thoughts. This stops us from having to consciously control systems throughout our body, such as our breathing, or why you don't feel your clothes and your skin all the time. The RAS filters out your thoughts and senses so that you only consciously think about the things that are important to you. If something is important to you, or it becomes a part of your awareness, sorry about feeling your clothes now, by the way, the reticular activating system reveals it to you. Another example most of you have probably already experienced. Think about the last time you were hypothetically shopping for a new car. One way out of your current price range, but hey, the Powerball is nearing 1 billion and you're holding on to the winning ticket. Let's say it's a gray Porsche Cayenne. Not soon after you've made up your mind, what do you suddenly start seeing all over the road? That's right, Porsche Cayennes. You've never noticed them before, but now you can't drive 5 minutes on the road without seeing 2 or even 3 of them. They were always there, but your brain and bank account had no reason to bring them to the forefront of your conscious mind. Until now. How does this connect to your issue of not being able to think of something that made you happy? To understand that, we need to learn a little bit more about that 3-pound meat sack wedged between your ears. Side note, I originally thought the brain weighed 7 pounds. I think I got that Jerry Maguire quote in the movie with Will Smith mixed up and connected somehow. Boy, was I wrong. Okay, back to the brain and thoughts. Not my confused ones. Based on whichever study you happen to click on first, 2020's Queen's University or the Cleveland Clinic, the average person has anywhere between 6,000 to 70,000 thoughts per day. Now, let's take the middle ground and say 38,000 for easy math. Of those 38,000 thoughts, according to the National Science Foundation, 80% are negative and 95% of them are repetitive. Woof. That's potentially 30,400 negative and repetitive thoughts a day. After hearing that, it's easy to understand why we all hold on to negative emotions and feelings about ourselves in every area of our lives, from relationships to work or even our physical appearances. Most of us are walking around every day with our brains stuck in the past, reliving every crappy thing that was ever said to us or every destructive thought we've ever had, like the world's most depressing treadmill. Yeah, and you thought treadmills couldn't get even more depressing. Negative thoughts can really mess with our mental health and overall well-being. They ramp up our stress and anxiety, leaving us feeling unhappy and even dissatisfied with life. And those repetitive thoughts, They get so deeply ingrained in our minds that it becomes tough to change our thought patterns and even break free from that negative cycle. You've heard the saying, neurons that fire together wire together, right? It just means that your brain creates shortcuts for similar situations, and it loves those shortcuts. Your brain will do everything in its power to avoid making conscious decisions. So, what are some best practices for turning negative and repetitive thoughts around? Well, for starters, you could try to be more solution-oriented. Think of this as a reframe on the cliched effective problem solver people like to put on their resumes. When we dwell on the problems, we get stuck in a negative thought cycle. Instead of focusing on the problem, try only focusing on solutions. Here, let's put it in a low-risk, real-world scenario. You go home tonight, knowing your partner doesn't have anything planned for dinner. Instead of asking, hey, what's for dinner? Or, what would you like for dinner? Both options are putting the question and essentially the problem on them. Instead, come up with a plan beforehand and let them know dinner is taken care of. This strategy can help you shift your mindset from negative, i.e., I don't know what I'm going to eat tonight and I will make it somebody else's problem, to a positive. I have control over my life, destiny, and tonight's dinner plans, empowering you to take action and change your circumstances. Now that might have been a silly example, but I hope it gets the point across. Do your best to be on the side of the solution and avoid playing the victim of circumstances. Another approach is you could try to challenge those negative thoughts. An effective strategy for breaking free from negative thinking patterns is to challenge them when they arrive. Simple questions to ask are, does this thought serve me? Or, am I benefiting from this thought? If the answer is no, simply acknowledge it and let it pass. Often, our thoughts are similar to the person who calls a customer service rep and knows they are not allowed to hang up on them. All they want to do is vent while someone else listens. You will be amazed at how quiet your mind can become if you just let it speak without judgment or acceptance. Simply acknowledge the thought and let it pass. It took a lot for me not to quote Katy Perry in a cheesy analogy. Just going to throw it out there. Often, our negative thoughts are not based on reality, but on our perceptions and beliefs around ourselves and the world around us. By challenging these thoughts and examining them critically, we can gain a more balanced perspective and reduce their power over us. All right, the last one for today, practicing gratitude. Focus on the good things in your life and express gratitude for them. You can create a more positive outlook and reduce the power of negative thoughts. This is the part where most people would say, consider starting a gratitude journal and writing down 3 things you're grateful for each and every day. But we're not about that. Let's start slow. Pick one of these 3 options to work over the next week. Growth isn't a one-size-fits-all t-shirt. If you've ever been referred to as a negative Nancy, being solution-oriented might not be as easy of an ask. Or if people often tell you you're confrontational, great. Try challenging your negative thoughts instead of others. Or at the very least, at the end of the day, try to look back and come up with one thing you were grateful for. It could be the bed you're laying in, the roof over your head, or even the person next to you. You might be surprised by what's been in front of you all along. Time to supercharge that reticular activating system to spot those moments. And who knows, maybe even find your one thing. We will end today back at the beginning with a message from a listener that I am sure we can all relate to at one point or another. They wrote, I just listened to What's Your One Thing? And as strange as it sounds, I'm having a hard time trying to think of my one thing. I think it's a result of being in a depression. It's hard to get your mind to focus on one thing that would make you feel happy. It's interesting how their perspective changes within just a few sentences. They start by using first-person pronouns, directly connecting themselves to the problem. I just listened to What's Your One Thing, and as strange as it sounds, I'm having a hard time trying to think of my one thing. I think it's a result of being in a depression. Then they shift to a third-person pronoun, almost distancing themselves from the ability to feel happy. It's hard to get your mind to focus on one thing that would make you feel happy. Strange. It's subtle, but intriguing shift. I'm not entirely sure what it means, but it feels significant. It takes a lot of courage to open up about your struggles, and I want you to know that you are not alone. Many people find it difficult to focus on the positive, especially when they are dealing with depression. It can be incredibly challenging to see the good when your mind is clouded by negative thoughts and feelings. By practicing what we talked about today, being solution-oriented, challenging negative thoughts, and practicing gratitude, you can start to shift your mindset. It won't happen overnight, but with time and consistency, these practices can help you see the good in your life and find your one thing that makes you happy. So, to our listener, and to anyone else who might be struggling, I encourage you to try these practices. Start small. Maybe today, focus on one positive thing about yourself. Tomorrow, challenge a negative thought that pops into your mind. And each day, think about one thing that you're grateful for. Over time, these small steps can lead to big changes. Remember, neurons that fire together, wire together. If this helps, I'd love to hear from you. What's your one thing that you gained from this today? Did you learn something new? Or are you going to try one of our practices we talked about? Let me know. It doesn't have to be long or complicated. Just pull out your phone, record a voice note, and email it to whatsyourone@gmail.com. That's the words what's your, the number 1, and the word thing @gmail.com. I'll be adding these recordings to future episodes and even inviting some of you to come onto the show to talk about your experiences. Remember, this podcast is about grounding ourselves and finding joy in the process of growth. It's a reminder that you don't need to do everything to be happy. Sometimes, one thing is enough. All right, before we wrap up, I want to thank you for joining me on this beautiful new adventure. I can't wait to hear from you, hear your stories, and share them with our growing community. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend or family who might need a little reminder that one small act can make a big difference and set them on the path to a beautiful and joyful life. Until next time, keep doing or finding your one thing. Talk to you soon.